Comment être serein quand on sait qu'il y a des policiers qui se manquent et qui ne sont pas sanctionnés?
Calling for urgent action to address the human rights crisis.
لا يوجد ناخبين اصلا، لا يوجد ناخبين، ومانعين الناخبين من الدخول.
Welcome to the World Press Freedom Conference 2020 in The Hague. We're in the World Forum here, and I'm happy to see you all from all over the world and tuning in to watch us. We celebrate today the World Press Freedom Day and the International Day to end impunity for crimes against journalists. We're in the middle of a global pandemic, you all know that, of course, and normally we would have like 2,000 people sitting here in the room enjoying the discussions and conversations. But of course, we can't do that. But instead of that, we have like over 2,000, almost 3,000 rather, 2,700 to be precise, registered digital participants. Welcome to you all. Also on YouTube you can follow us, and you can follow us throughout the day and tomorrow as well to look at the program. It's bigger than ever, the conference, you could say. Welcome as well to Minister Blok. Welcome, I'm really happy to see you, Foreign Minister Stef Blok. And later on you'll see Director General Audrey Azoulay as well, the host actually of this conference. Mr. Blok, when I say, because we're talking about free press, we're talking about freedom, World Press Freedom Conference, when I say press and free, what comes to mind when you hear those words?
That there is a very important and close connection between press and free. There can be no press without freedom.
Yeah.
And having been a politician for some 20 years now, I've always been very closely connected to press.
Yeah.
I think like every politician in the world, I start in the morning scanning through the newspapers, looking at the journals, maybe hoping that I will be in it in a positive way.
Sometimes not.
Sometimes not. Yeah. That's also part of free press.
Yeah.
But I need the press not only to follow me and my colleague ministers, but also to know what's happening. Of course, in my own country, but especially being a foreign affairs minister, I need press coverage from the rest of the world. I did it this morning. I had the pleasure of speaking with young journalists from Ethiopia, from Libya, and I really could tell them from the bottom of my heart, we need you. We need you to know what's happening in your country and to do what we have to do as ministers.
We're going to talk about a bit further as well, because you got a personal relationship to this topic as well. As I said, Madame Azoulay is from UNESCO. She can't be here because of personal reasons, but of course she would like to say some words to you as well.
I'm delighted to be with you for this official celebration of World Press Freedom Day. Once again, I would like to thank the Kingdom of the Netherlands for co-hosting this conference with UNESCO. This important event is an opportunity to highlight once again the essential role played by the media in our societies. Not only are journalists conveying vital information during the pandemic, they also help us distinguish all manner of truth from falsehood, which is fundamental to our social contract. Yet, journalists continue to be targeted, harassed, and attacked. In recent years, threats against them have grown because they disrupt, because they tell the truth, or to put it simply, because they do their job. According to UNESCO's most recent report on the safety of journalists and the danger of impunity, between 2010 and 2019, close to 900 journalists were killed because they're journalists, one every 4 days. It would be wrong to believe that most of these tragedies took place in countries at war. More than 2/3 of journalists killed last year lost their lives in countries at peace, while investigating corruption or human rights violations, among other things. The vast majority of these crimes, nearly 9 in 10, go unpunished, causing families even more pain and sending a chilling message to others. Women journalists are also targeted, especially by online and offline harassment. According to a new global survey conducted by UNESCO, 73% have experienced physical or sexual threats online. This safety crisis is compounded by an economic one. For many media, COVID-19 has exacerbated an already precarious financial situation. Independent media are especially at risk. Among 165 independent news media organizations surveyed by the Reuters Institute at Oxford University show that more than 8 in 10 have lost revenues in 2020, 36% by a third or more. This day is therefore an opportunity to reaffirm our commitment to journalism without fear or favor.
Yeah, Madame Azoulay from UNESCO, the Director General. Mr. Blok, to organize this conference is quite a commitment, of course. Could you explain why freedom of press is such an important dossier for the Dutch policy, for the Dutch human rights policy, actually?
Well, first of all, it's part of a very Dutch tradition. Our country exists for 400 years now. And gained its freedom in a struggle for independence. And freedom of religion, freedom of expression was very much part of that struggle. In those days, people from all over Europe came to the Netherlands because they were free to speak out, to publish books. And that has resulted in a tradition, also a judicial tradition here in The Hague. We are the proud host of the International Criminal Court, International Court of Arbitrage, the Peace Palace. Yep. So, with such a history, which is also deeply felt in Dutch society, we feel obliged, but also honored to host a conference like today.
Yeah, And still, it's for us maybe it's normal, it's regular, but for lots of countries it's quite difficult as well. Around the world, we see an increase even in attacks on journalists. How do you perceive to that subject? Because I understand you've got a personal story to that as well.
Yes, you are no doubt referring to the death of my cousin, Sander Tounes,
Yes.
who was killed in 1999, working as a journalist for Financial Times and Dutch newspapers in Indonesia. And one day I woke up, I heard the radio news that a Dutch journalist was killed in Indonesia. And 10 minutes later, the phone rang and my father told me it was Sander, which brings it's very close to you. And of course, unfortunately, since Sander, numerous of his colleagues have been killed.
What is it you want to concretely do to help journalists like your cousin, like Sander?
I really feel it as a moral duty, as a minister for the Netherlands, this country with this tradition, that is not free of its own problems. To be honest, journalists have been under attack in the Netherlands too, by organized crimes, by people just hating the messages they spread. But in the Netherlands, we have to be vigilant too. At the same time, within and outside Europe, in a number of countries, the situation is far worse. And often when I visit other countries, the embassy organizes meetings for me with local journalists, which are extremely important as a source of information to do my work. But it also makes clear to me that I have a responsibility, together with my fellow foreign affairs ministers, to do all we can to make sure that they can do their work in safety.
Of course, you've got words, but you've got a contribution as well. A contribution, as I understand, of 7 million euros. In what way would you want to make a difference with that money?
We will be providing 7 million euros to the United Nations to work together with them on training programs.
Yeah.
For instance, for police officers in how to protect journalists, training for journalists, and also programs for the safety of journalists. In the Netherlands, we have what we call a Shelter City program, where journalists or human rights defenders from all over the world can come to the Netherlands for a period of 3 months to breathe some fresh air, to work in safety, to discuss with colleagues. We will also extend that program. And I'm really very glad that later today I will have a ministerial meeting. It's actually the first time ever that we combine a ministerial meeting with the World Press Freedom Conference.
With
So
54 ministers.
50 ministers. So
Yeah,
I'm very happy with all the 3,000 people participating in the conference. But the ministers will underwrite with me a statement that we will do our utmost to protect journalists. And those more than 50 signatures are very precious to me. And of course, I will call on them to cooperate with me in convincing the ministers that are not yet under the declaration and working on procedures and methods to better protect journalists worldwide.
And we're going to talk about that later on when you have that conversation and you have signed and you have all those signatures of the ministers. To work internationally with different organizations is really important. Working together is important. Those values are really important to have that solidarity and international cooperation to overcome the challenges we have when you talk about journalists under fire. Madame Azoulay would like to talk about those values.
These are the very values of the entire UN family, gathering today to support journalist safety. The very values that allow us to launch, during this conference, an international forum bringing together major institutional players, NGOs, judges, lawyers, prosecutors, to defend the press and to defend press freedom. I warmly thank the government of the Netherlands for supporting this forum and for its ongoing support to UNESCO's International Programme for the Development of Communication, which is celebrating its 40th anniversary this year, and also to our multi-donor program for freedom of expression. It is because of a commitment like this that UNESCO has been able to defend journalists' work on the ground and promote freedom of expression around the world for decades. This is especially true in the legal field. We have developed fruitful partnerships, for instance, with the African Court on Human and People's Rights and the Inter-American Court of Human Rights. Since 2013, this has allowed us to raise awareness among 17,000 justice professionals in more than 60 countries, in Latin America, in Africa, in the Arab world, on the need to defend press freedom and independence. Through a new partnership with the International Association of Prosecutors, which I think, an association based in The Hague, we will also be raising awareness of these important issues among prosecutors across the globe.
Yeah. Madame Azoulay. As you might have seen, of course, Mr. Blok is here in the studio with me, but we have another guest here, and he's working from minute one. That's Emanuele Del Rosso, and he's a cartoonist, and you're going to make some drawings and have some images about this conference, and wish you good luck doing that. Thank you so much for being here. This entire conference, by the way, is going to be interactive. In every session, you can submit your questions. Please do so through the platform using the Ask the Speaker function. Please do so, and we'll try to have some questions here on the table as well. But welcome back at the table. For now, let's bring on our speakers. Three strong women on my left-hand side for you in the image. First, Maria Ressa, welcome. Editor-in-chief of online news website Rappler in the Philippines. Elisabeth Bumiller. How do you pronounce your name correctly, Ms. Elisabeth? Bumiller. It's for a Dutch guy, it's really difficult. Yeah. Bumiller. New York Times bureau chief joining us from the US. Welcome as well. And Nima Elbagir, a senior international correspondent for CNN in London. Just to say, just this morning I had a conversation already with your colleague, Christian Amanpour. We'll be sending out that interview tomorrow in this emission. Ms. Bumiller, I'll start with you. What was the headline today in your newspaper?
Well, it's on your side of the Atlantic. Here it is. It's about the vaccine in Britain getting into people's arms. Okay. You can see that.
So when we talk about press freedom in the world and in your country right now, where are we? Where are we headed to?
Well, it's been a rough 4 years under Donald Trump. He has called us the enemy of the people. He's used the term fake news, which has been repeated by 50 presidents, prime ministers, and other government officials around the world. So I think that his attacks on the press have had a corrosive effect on all of us. But I would add that in this country, we have had the New York Times, we've had record readership, record digital subscribers, record print. You know, we've done well despite the fact that Donald Trump has worked very, very hard to undermine confidence in the free press.
Nima Elbagir, what do you think about the state of journalism in the world? Because CNN was, well, Donald Trump had some words about you as well.
Pretty sure he had some words about everyone. I don't think we were particularly unique, although we were a target he enjoyed, which comes back again to the need and the impact and the influence of a free press. I worry that we are taking a breath and kind of exhaling a little too early. The sense that we get is that there is a contagion, that the lessons of the populist leadership, of the populist wave, whether in the US, the UK, or Europe, has been learned very well by leaders around the world. So for instance, in Ethiopia at the moment, there's a complete communications blackout. We have no access. We have real fears about what's going on inside the Tigray region, but there have been no consequences for that lack of access. Because how can President Trump, how can Prime Minister Johnson, how can any of the many leaders within the European Union speak out about a lack of access when they themselves would love to do nothing more than exactly the same? If they could shut us down, they would. So my worry is that we were as a consensus, as journalists, perhaps we were a little too slow to realize what was happening. We were too slow to recognize that the language that was being used was dangerous and it was authoritarian and it was designed to destroy public trust, and perhaps have a coherent, cogent response together as a profession. And at the same time, my worry is that we will now presume that this is over. And I'm sure Elisabeth is saying, no, we don't, because we don't know what's going to happen between now and 2024. So we definitely don't think this is over from the American perspective. But it just feels like there are so many presidents and prime ministers around the world who have delighted in the way that the institutions of democracy themselves, and journalists and journalism are an essential institution of democracy, that they have been eroded in ways that could be fatal.
We're not only going to talk about the United States, because we're going to talk about Philippines as well. But Mr. Blok, as you're sitting here, what do you think when you hear this? Would you say that the press is facing similar threats in different parts of the world, hearing this?
Well, I'm afraid so. Of course, to a different extent in different countries. But I already mentioned that also in the Netherlands, widely regarded as a free and peaceful country, which we are indeed.
Yeah.
But still, I must confess, journalists are under pressure here. I must also confess that within the European Union, I sometimes have fierce debates with colleagues of mine, because I'm worried about the freedom of the press in their countries.
Hungary and Poland.
Of course, the most well-known examples, but we've seen the death of a journalist in Malta. Unfortunately, there are far too many examples, and it is, of course, a job that's never done. You have to be vigilant, because indeed it might be attractive to politicians or organized crime to try to control the press.
The last 4 years, we've heard lots of about that word fake news, disinformation in general, of course. And when we talk about disinformation, we should bring in Maria Ressa, of course. Before speaking to you, Maria, about press freedom in the Philippines, let's have a look at a clip from a mission called 1,000 Cuts.
Yung inyong mga reporter, they will be allowed to criticize us. But you go to jail for your crime.
Well, I would like to post bail because I've been served a warrant, but the warrant that's been served to me is...
A prominent Philippines journalist, Maria Ressa, has been arrested on fraud charges. Last month, Ms. Ressa, the executive editor of a news website, Rappler, was arrested over an alleged internet libel case.
The prosecutors filed the latest charges against her while Ressa was on a trip in the U.S. Media watchdogs say the charges against Ressa were aimed at intimidating those who challenged Duterte's rule and his war on drugs.
Maria Ressa, I just heard that just 2 weeks ago, another arrest warrant was being issued against you. 9th arrest already. What happened?
I'm doing my job, you know, and really I think listening to everyone, I think the one big thing that we haven't mentioned yet is how technology has really turned our world upside down. Because while you see me being arrested there, that was March last year, you know, and I am now facing my 9th criminal case. It all began with exponential attacks on social media. And I think that's the biggest shift right now, because digital authoritarians, this kind of populist authoritarianism that's roiling through the world, is enabled by the technology that delivers the news, right? The world's largest distributor of news is Facebook. And the problem now is I think we're at this existential moment where we must do something to make sure that the platforms that deliver the news, that their biases don't actually kill democracy. In this film, we call it death by 1,000 cuts, right? I see Nima nodding, but you know, really, here's the reality. The research shows us that on these platforms, the social media platforms, lies laced with anger and hate spread faster and further than facts. That's on Twitter, on Facebook. It is the data that we have here. The Philippines is Facebook country. 100% of Filipinos on the internet are on Facebook. We're kind of like the fruit flies, first generation, Cambridge Analytica whistleblower Chris Wiley called us the petri dish. Well, our dystopian present has now hit many democracies around the world, and we've got to do something about this, and that is to make sure that news reaches you, that the platforms, the social media platforms, because of their business model, that they do not insidiously manipulate us to tear democracy down.
At the same time, saying that, you put yourself at risk doing it in your country. How do you handle that risk? Because when I hear President Duterte say those things, I'm in the Netherlands and I feel the threats. And you are actually in the country. He's talking to you. How do you handle those kind of threats?
Actually, if you look at it in the film, he is towering over 26-year-old Pia Renada, our palace reporter, right? And yes, he's called me out on nationwide surveys. He's threatened me. Talk about asymmetrical power, right? I'm a citizen and a journalist. So there's no contest. But look, it's been 4 years. In 2016, we talked the series that got us, we held two men to account. We tried to hold impunity we tried to hold power to account, and that's President Duterte and his drug war, and Mark Zuckerberg on Facebook. I mean, this is the world we live in now, that Rodrigo Duterte and Mark Zuckerberg are in the same breath. What do we have to do? We do our jobs. That's the main thing to do, because in the end, the attacks are coming bottom up. They're said, much like President Trump, these attacks online then come top down. When that happened in 2017 to us, when President Duterte said that, attacked us, the next week we got our first subpoena. In 2018, the government filed 11 cases against us. In 2019, I had 8 arrest warrants and 8 criminal cases against Rappler. In 2020, I was declared guilty, along with a former colleague, of cyber libel for a story that we wrote in 2012 that I didn't write, edit, or supervise, allegedly violating a law that didn't even exist. So welcome to our upside down.
Elisabeth, we've got an upside-down world as well in the West. Disinformation, the platforms. How does a newspaper like New York Times react to that? Has your role changed, you feel?
Yes. Well, it was fascinating to hear about your view of Facebook and Mark Zuckerberg and the social media platforms, because they're under enormous pressure in the United States. And you will see our role has changed in that we try the best we can to call out that disinformation. Starting with this election, we have a special disinformation team that will that sort of finds the worst floating around out there on the internet every day and knocks it down. Now that's, again, that depends on the number of people reading the New York Times, which is rather large. But again, it's just an attempt to try and tamp down on the worst of this disinformation. We also, are different in our coverage of President Trump. In the old days, previous presidents, they would say something and we would say, well, the facts are this, or the Democrats say this. Oh, now we just call them out and say President Trump falsely said, President Trump baselessly said, President Trump said without evidence. I mean, you see it in our news columns now. And we also just have used the word, finally, we've gotten around to using the word lie. We use it in saying like last week, President Trump spent 46 minutes in a videotaped speech at the White House behind the presidential seal, and almost everything he said was not true about how he had actually won the election. So we're just much tougher in our coverage of the president, and some people don't like it, but it's our obligation, it's our responsibility to say that what this president is saying is not true. And we also have a very active fact-checking department and a very active fact-check reporter. So
fact-checking used to be the icing on the cake. Now it's the cake, the fact-checking. Nima, you were born in Sudan, and that's a totally different ballgame. Before I talk to you, let's have a look at the footage you made there in Sudan.
This is my hometown, Khartoum. For months now, in the grip of pro-democracy protests. Much of it brutally hidden from the world by Sudan's government. And yet people here are still risking everything for change. even as the United States works to restore diplomatic relations with Sudan's government.
How do you look at reporting from your country? I mean, your country is in a transition of the democracy, and freedom of press is on the fire as well there. How do you get to work properly?
Well, we are, as you said, in a shaky transition, but in a transition. So that's incredibly optimistic. I do think that sometimes, just briefly to comment on this, we talk about what people like Maria and I witness as kind of being seen as the front lines. But I think we need to take a moment to talk about what, Elisabeth and her bureau and our colleagues in the White House have gone through for the last 4 years. How does that feel when the most powerful man in the world calls you out and tells you you are nothing? These are all different tools, but they're from the same toolbox. And I think it's very important that we recognize this, that authoritarians are very able to react to the different situations and the scenarios, but fundamentally, the end goal is the same, which is disenfranchising the press to disenfranchise the people. In Sudan, we're rebuilding. And so that's why these are things that are on my mind a lot. What is the difference between us critiquing us, I say us, the extraordinary journalists that are at home in Sudan, critiquing the head of the Sovereign Council or critiquing the Prime Minister? At what point do people start to say, well, you're shaking the bedrock of this democracy? Because fundamentally, if we're doing our jobs properly, then we are unpopular, right? And what the social media giants refuse to take into account is what is their responsibility to be able to differentiate between just, you people are always telling us things are going wrong, and it is our right as citizens to push back because we should be open to criticism. And when they become another tool in the toolbox of authoritarians, and at what point when you have made so much money, do you also become not a platform, but become part of the media landscape? At what point do you have the same ethical responsibilities as we do? And these are things that we're all thinking about in Sudan. But it's really interesting for me to hear Maria's experience now, because it really mirrored the experience of my father, who is a publisher. Both of my parents were publishers. They had their publishing license taken away. And it was the last independent newspaper in Sudan. And it was dismantled in perfectly legal ways. That is the new tool of the authoritarian.
Do it legally.
It is using, legally, it is using the fact that they own most of the advertising revenue will come through either the government or through the big businesses that are allied to the government. They undercut you. With my father, they bought an entire printing press and undercut what he was able to offer in the market. And then they passed a law saying that all newspapers must have a certain share holding from the government. And then once they came in and became a partner, then they dismantled it from the inside. And now he's in the process of trying to get the name back. And what he's facing is that under the laws of today or the laws of yesterday, this is all legal. And that is scarier. What happens when you, as a ratings beholding network or as a newspaper or as an organization, a TV channel, anywhere in the world, and let's say Donald Trump goes and sets up and he becomes one of your biggest advertisers. How do you protect the press against that? And I think these are the conversations that we should be having. And that's why I always try really hard to remind people that it's not just dangerous at the front lines. It's not just dangerous in the Philippines. It is psychologically dangerous in the White House. It is psychologically dangerous when you're in number 10. And we have to remember all of these pressure points and try and figure out how to protect journalists who don't have the platforms of the New York Times or CNN. How do we protect them? Or don't have Maria's international profile?
Nima,
how are we protecting them?
If I can interrupt you, because we have some questions as well from the audience. No, I like the way you speak, because the three of you are really speaking out really well. I cheer you for that. So the audience have some questions as well. And Hajar is going to take the audience questions. Hajar, come in, please. The voice of the audience is really important in the room. Before you introduce some of your questions, where are the people watching from? Can you see that?
Yeah, that's a good point maybe to start with, because we see that we have a very, very, very diverse audience. We have people tuning in from Aruba, the Philippines, Nigeria, China, Ghana, Australia, and so many more countries. So it's really good to see that there are so many people watching, since this is, of course, a global issue that needs to be tackled. Now, indeed, we do have a lot of questions from the audience. To the people watching at home, if you still have a burning question, please do ask. I'm a 21-year-old who's been given an iPad to check your online comments, so it's sort of in my nature to do this.
Don't come up with excuses, Hajar.
I won't. So maybe we can just hop right into the first question. The first question asked by one of our viewers is for Maria Ressa, and it is, how do we address misinformation and disinformation in communities where factual information seems to be ignored and doubted?
You know, this is a byproduct of the information ecosystem we live in today. Journalists, we've lost the gatekeeping powers, and I'd say that began as early as 2014 in the Ukraine. And the social media platforms that deliver the news actually are also where influence operations, and the easy one that we always go to is Russian disinformation, and how this, let's talk of the United States, how that attacks both sides of a divide like Black Lives Matter to tear them apart, to sow chaos, to actually rip apart society, which it has done. And then that changes the minds of real people. Nima talked about manipulation, insidious attacks against us. Well, the attacks aren't just on the press. The insidious manipulation that happens to every user on social media is there. So how do you attack it? I think the first step is to understand that the very platforms we use actually create models of us. So when you put something in on Facebook, if you're from the Philippines, if you put your content in, all of that data comes together and machine learning pulls it together. So it creates a model of you, knows you better than you know yourself, takes the most vulnerable moment to a message, whether that's then given to a company or a country, advertising or propaganda, that's sold. And then when you're nudged, whether you take it or not, this becomes a perpetual machine that works off of your data. So insidious manipulation, this is it. How do you deal with it? You step back, especially if you're angry. You try to the two systems of thinking as human beings, thinking fast, thinking slow. Don't think with your emotions. Verify it before you get angry. When you're angry, step back a lot and think.
Thank you, Hajar, and thank you, Maria, and thank you all, Elisabeth, Nima, because we got so many questions, but so little time.
Yes.
We could talk like for 3 hours with you. Thank you so much doing this. Ladies and gentlemen, Ahmad Judah dances 1 in a million. Ahmad Jude, he danced 1 in a million. Thank you, Ahmad. You can tune into WPFC TV on Channel 4 at 4:15 to hear more from Ahmad. He will be in conversation with the Dutch Minister of Education, Culture and Science, Ingrid van Engelshoven. So please tune in. Before we bring in our next panels, for the second panel today, I just want you to know that you can again submit your questions. And I know we got really short period of time to answer those, but still do send them in because it's still important. Hajar will post them for you in a bit, Hajar, so you're ready for that as well. Then our next talk show panel, they're already ready. Asli Erdogan, award-winning Turkish author and human rights activist living in exile in Germany. Welcome in the show. And Lina Attalah, Egyptian journalist, recently featured on the 2020 Time 100 Influential People list. And of course, Mr. Blok, thank you for staying with us and joining us. Lina, I would like to start with you. Let's have a look, before I talk to you, let's have a look at a little clip first.
They work under constant threat of arrest. Attalah was most recently detained in May while interviewing the mother of a political prisoner. Released 24 hours later, she was right back at work.
Every time we come out of these incidents, it adds to the fear, but it adds to the determination at the same time.
Authorities have tried to silence her by blocking the Madamasser website, but Attalah continues publishing on alternate sites and social media.
Yeah, Lina, you have been detained. My question now is, are you safe at the moment and to do your job?
There isn't a very definite way to answer this. Nobody can guarantee full safety.
Unfortunately, Lina, the line is really bad, your sound. We're going to try to improve it. Just hang on for a bit so we can see if we can do something about it. Asli Erdogan, as you might know, that Lina is really under pressure. That must sound familiar to you as well. You would like to share a piece of writing with us, I understand. Ooh, your sound is not that good as well. We're going to try to technically improve this while I talk to Mr. Blok, because we know the stories they have is really horrendous, of course. The one is being threatened and by the countries. And of course, you're going to sign a document later on with over 50 ministers, but that's on paper. How do you, what can we do as a society, as politicians, as fellow journalists as well?
I think a lot of things. Not only expressing our support for both brave women, but in my role, it's my duty to speak up for journalists when I meet with my counterparts. And I regularly speak to both the Turkish Foreign Affairs Minister and the Egyptian Foreign Affairs Minister. And unfortunately, I always have to talk to them about human rights abuses and the lack of freedom for journalists. And I continue to do so. First of all, because I have to, but also because I know that Europe and the Netherlands are important to them. And that the relation, economic, people to people, between, in this case, Turkey and Egypt, are of value to them. So although I cannot guarantee that after such a meeting or a phone call, directly somebody will be released, I know that I have the opportunity to speak up. So I will continue to do so, and I will continue to ask my colleagues in the European Union and outside to stand together with me.
To me, it seems so difficult if you have that position of a politician where you have a delicate affair, of course, relationship with countries. On the one hand, you can do as much as you can do, and you can, of course, talk to them about it, but it's sovereignty in the country, so you can't do anything about that. Isn't that sometimes frustrating?
It is frustrating, but it is not a reason to do nothing. For Turkey, the Netherlands is a large investor.
Yeah.
So they know good relations. Of course, they should act out of themselves in the interest of human rights and freedom of the press. But I also explained to them, most Dutch companies don't want to explain in the Netherlands to their consumers that they're doing business in a country where human rights are violated. And that's true. And that's why I'm still motivated and convinced that one day or another we will reach results.
Lina, I see you again, Lina Attalah. I ask you whether you're safe, whether you can do what you would like to do. How is your position right now at the moment, Lina?
I hope you're hearing me better now.
Very good, very good.
Excellent. I was just saying that I think there is no sense of safety in the absolute sense with the kind of job that we're doing in the country right now. But at the same time, we don't really have the choice of not doing it, since we're still out of prison somehow. But I do live in a context that has increasingly where the political authorities have increasingly silenced any voices, be it in media or in civil society at large, that basically narrate something not to the liking of these authorities. And the silencing happens in a diversity of ways, starting from arrests, prosecution based on, especially in the case of journalists, based on such things as anti-terror laws. So we've had journalists being easily called out as terrorists, thrown into remand detention indefinitely for very long times in order to avoid due judicial processes in the first place. So it has been an environment, to say the least, not encouraging to do that kind of work.
Asli, Erdogan just told you live in exile in Germany and you would like to share a piece of writing with us. I think the sound is good as well with you, so maybe you can share that piece of writing with us at the moment.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh, great. Well, I'm actually a little writer who worked only 3 years as a columnist and got in weird trouble. So I thought my piece that got me into trouble could give a better idea of actually happening in Turkey. The tender silence of the translation is from me, so it's rather a hasty translation. The tender silence of the sky, that's no signs, reflections, or scars of the human being, of the human story in its free fall from one word to the next. One more letter. One more day with beginning or end. Misplaced comma between two sentences repeating each other, the past and the future. I'm among the crowds in a cafe, reading a letter about a prisoner. My eyes turned to the sky are as empty and void, drained. An unborn scream is locked within me. The prisoner celebrated his 18th birthday last week in a prison infirmary. Case confirmed, 15 years sentence, diagnosis leukemia. Rigor of the words. I will pass through this day like all others, as if tiptoeing at a hospital corridor. I will present to the world my most durable face, made up, my best crafted sentences, my dead stiff words. The destiny of the 18-year-old prisoner is like the thread hole of a needle I have to pass through, dragging along my own heavy self and the whole history of humankind. Once more, 1,000 times, countless times more. Holding into a single filled with the blood of centuries. Conscious, in its own rigor mortis. I don't want to be an accomplice. It's a simple sentence, isn't it?
Wow. Is this a piece where you sat in prison for 146 days?
No, actually, this is, I have written several articles like that, but they about this more or less like that, about conscience, about ethics, about morality, about other prisoners, about Kurdish issue. I wrote only about the victim, story of the victim. That was my topic as a literary writer in my novels as well. But also my column was strictly confined to this.
Okay. You are both in the, as you could say, in the front lines of journalism, Asli and Lina. If you could say some words to young journalists about free press and its importance, to start with you, Asli, what would you say to those young journalists?
Oh, well, I mean, when the regime gets more and more oppressive, they first start with journalists. First to prison are the journalists. But it never stops there. It never did in Turkey. Then came the turn of writers. Generally, they arrested us because of our relation with the press, the academics. And then even to the last person, even the richest businessman couldn't feel safe in Turkey unless he was part of AKP. So the press is at really the front line because they know all the true sins of the system. And I would like to say there are words that can't be silenced. And one of them is freedom. And if you don't know the power of the word, you don't know the power of the human being. It's a very old quotation. That is what I would like to tell them.
And Lina, what would you like to share with young journalists who think about that free press and its importance? I think we lost Lina. Oh, you're there. Yeah.
Okay. The one thing I'll say is that, we cannot outpower the authorities that are ruling us, just like Maria Ressa was just saying. But at the same time, if we commit obsessively to what we're doing with a heightened sense of inquiry, powered with a sense of curiosity, and with a commitment to producing something engaging, which is something that develops over time and at this intersection of different people and collaborators and editors we work with, we stand a chance to win. I cannot guarantee that we will be winners tomorrow. At least as far as we're concerned, we are winners today, staying here. And like I always like to say, we might not be the kind of people who would take power, but we build power with the kind of work that we're doing. So just to encourage whoever wants to pursue this profession in such difficult times across the world, but particularly in our side of the world.
Stay with us because later on Hajar is going to pose one question from the audience. Before I do that, I would like to say to you that you can go to the host of the WPFC TV. It's Diane Liesker in Studio Pink. You can tune in there for behind-the-scenes interviews and discussions. Diane, tell us all about what's going to happen there in your studio later on.
Yes, I'm very excited to be here in the Pink Studio, or Studio 4. Maria Ressa is also joining us in a few minutes to talk about her documentary 1,000 Cuts. And we will hear from journalists Peter Bardi and Beata Bologova about press freedom in Slovakia. So I hope everybody's going to tune in to Channel 4, the Pink Studio, right after the opening ends. So I hope to see you here then.
Thank you so much. Hajar, some questions, maybe one or two? I hope to.
Yeah, we do have a question indeed already. The first one is for Lina. A lot of reactions, by the way, also on Twitter. A lot of people really feel the courage of your acts and really are inspired by them. A question from Nigeria for Lina is, how did you feel when such a situation happened to you, where you were hindered in your work? And most especially, what motivates you to continue your job despite those situations?
The one thing I'll say is that when the first arrest happened, I felt that it was all over. And even though it was such a difficult moment and it was really, stepping into the unknown of, for how long will this last, how much suffering will be incurred, although these were very difficult sentiments, I always operated with the possibility of this day coming. I'm never confident that we are here to stay. I desire to stay, but it's out of my hands. So I think this psychological mindset somehow helps us, in a way or another, sort of be prepared for such doom. Sometimes, what keeps me staying is being out of jail, basically, but also the communities that we've managed to grow around us, who really feel that the job that we're doing is very important. So I often say that it becomes less of a choice, or it's at least a one-time choice to start doing this job, and then it becomes very hard to stop doing it. So I guess we should carry on somehow.
Okay.
Yeah.
Question maybe for Lina?
Yes, we also have a question
for Asli. I mean,
yes, for Asli, there is a question that asks, do you think that the challenges that women journalists face are different from those of their male colleagues?
In Turkey or in general?
In general, perhaps?
Well, life for women is more difficult anywhere in the world, and whichever profession you hold. As a female writer, as a female physicist, I think I've never been on the same scale, judged on the same scale with men. I mean, I'm pretty sure. I'm 53 years old now. It is for sure. No, men are judged at one scale. And of course, if you are in a profession that is already risky, the risks will be perhaps heavier for a woman. First of all, I've been lynched socially twice, and of course, you can imagine prostitute, whore, and all these kind of things. They sound easy, but it's actually quite damaging. And men are at least safer in that side, that they are not sexually assaulted. Sometimes they do, but not as women. Whenever one gets angry at me, the first place he thinks of attacking is belly down. Anything is harder for women, even from the pandemic. Prison, some women have children when they are arrested, babies. Hygienic conditions are more difficult. So it is, I think, twice as hard for a woman if times get more difficult.
Thank you so much, Asli Erdogan. I'm saying your name again, Asli Erdogan, award-winning Turkish author and human rights activist living in exile in Germany. And I say your name as well, Lina Attalah, Egyptian journalist recently featured in the 2020 Time 100 Influential People list. Thank you for your courage. Thank you for your words. Thank you for your inspiration. And thank you, Minister Blok. You're going to your colleagues. You're going to come back and report on that here at the table later on in this program. With that, we conclude the opening show of the World Press Freedom Conference 2020. We're going to talk about diversity. There's a session about inclusivity. And so stay here and enjoy everything and get informed and get inspired. Thank you so much. See you soon.